Hi, I'm Andrew Connell, and I'm a Microsoft MVP in the area of Microsoft 365 development. And I have a lot of experience with SharePoint development, including all of the different development models that we've had, Microsoft Graph development, Microsoft Teams development, and developing add-ins for Microsoft Office, as well as working with Microsoft Identity, including Azure AD. OneDrive is the files hub for Office 365. People work with files in different contexts, such as Microsoft Teams, Groups, SharePoint, and many more places. With OneDrive, users can access these files no matter where they are stored, and Microsoft Graph enables you to use a single API to work with these files. Files in Office 365 are stored in drives. Users can store files in a personal drive, such as their OneDrive for Consumer, or in a shared drive powered by a SharePoint document library. OneDrive's flexibility lets users collaborate however it works best for them. Users can share files, links to files, copy or move files to team drives, or even attach OneDrive files to mail messages in Outlook. In this section, you'll learn how to get lists of individual files from OneDrive with Microsoft Graph. Microsoft Graph can be used to get a list of files or download an individual file using its unique ID or with a relative path to the file in a SharePoint site. Microsoft's Office 365 developer vision focuses on the user's experience and their data. As a developer, you can bring your applications into their user experience. With over 1.2 billion users of Office worldwide, this is a huge opportunity to provide a window into your applications, as well as being able to connect into their data and add intelligence to your applications. There are currently 850 million events created a month and a total of 470 petabytes of data or more in the service that can add value for your users. Microsoft Graph is the gateway to your data in the Microsoft Cloud, as you can see from the list of resources, services, and entities on this slide. There are lots of things that you can take advantage of in the Office 365 platform. You can work with mail, calendar, contacts, tasks, in addition to content inside of SharePoint sites and lists, files inside of OneDrive, and interact with Microsoft Teams and many more things that you can take advantage of. Each of these services typically has its own API that you can leverage to read and write to these different services. However, it can be challenging and cumbersome to work with these different services as each has implemented their own endpoint, permission model, and syntax for performing some operations like searching and other subtleties. Each endpoint is also secured with Azure AD, which means that developers will need to authenticate with Azure AD and obtain an OAuth access token for each service they want to work with. The Microsoft Graph addresses many of these challenges by acting as a proxy to a lot of the different services. It encompasses data residing in Office 365, such as mail, calendar, and contacts, and OneDrive, as well as many others. In addition, it also provides access to Windows 10 and enterprise mobility and security under a single endpoint. This endpoint, https://graph.microsoft.com, allows developers to create applications that will only have to authenticate once and obtain a single access token that can be used to retrieve data from multiple sources, greatly simplifying the development process. Each service will still have their individual permissions or scopes, but all of these permissions are defined in a single place under the Microsoft Graph endpoint and handles the underlying calls and permission requests to each of these different endpoints. Now, why would you integrate with OneDrive file storage in the cloud? Its one reason is to tap into billions of files. OneDrive users can access their files from any device, online or offline, and share files with people inside or outside of their organization. OneDrive enables real-time co-authoring in familiar apps like Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, and files light up with rich thumbnails for hundreds of formats, video streaming, analytics, and many more things that are all powered by Microsoft Graph. Data in OneDrive is protected with advanced encryption, compliance, and security features that these customers trust. You can also store your app's files in a powerful cloud. When you store your files in OneDrive, your app can take advantage of the features of Microsoft Cloud, and your users can access their files anywhere. Use the File Picker SDK to quickly open, download, save, and share files stored in OneDrive from within your own app, using the same experience OneDrive users are familiar with. Get information about selected files directly from the Picker SDK or use Microsoft Graph's API directly to interact more deeply with the files. Use specific folders to store files in well-known locations in OneDrive, like Documents and Camera Roll, or give your app its own personal folder. You can also bring your app straight to users within OneDrive. OneDrive consumers can use or launch your app directly from within OneDrive to open, edit, or preview files. Use OneDrive's file handler extensions to provide icons and previews for your own custom file extensions. Add your app to the New button, or even add your own custom actions to the menu bar to launch your app. You can also work with content in formats that your app is going to understand. Your app can get file content in the format that is the most convenient for you. Your app can display custom-sized thumbnails for hundreds of different file formats, and you can download files in different formats like PDF, docx, and others. You can work with file contents and metadata without downloading the entire binary. With Microsoft Graph, you can access rich content through REST APIs without having to download the binary. You can explore extracted metadata from photo, audio, and video files, and use the Excel API to work directly with raw data stored in an Excel workbook. You can even use the Notes API to access the contents of OneNote notebooks. And finally, you can react to file changes, because with webhooks, your app can get notified when files change so that you can quickly react. Use the Delta API to see what changed since the last time your app synchronized with the Microsoft Cloud. Now let's explore the Microsoft Graph files-related endpoint-related resources. The Drive endpoint represents a logical container of files, like a document library or a user's OneDrive. A Drive item represents an item within a drive, like a document, photo, video, or a folder. These two resources expose data in the following ways. You've got properties, which are going to include things such as an ID, a name, and expose simple values as strings, numbers, and booleans. A facet, such as a file or a photo, expose complex values, and the presence of facets, like file or folder, indicate behaviors and properties of a Drive item. And references, such as children and thumbnails, point to other resource collections. Access to the currently signed-in user's OneDrive using the https graph.microsoft.com/v1.0/me/drive endpoint is how you're going to get to the current user's OneDrive. This endpoint will return details about the user's OneDrive, including the date it was created, last modified, quota information, and what type of OneDrive it is, if it's a OneDrive for business or if it's a OneDrive for consumer. To view the contents of a user's OneDrive, use the /drive/root endpoint. This endpoint is going to return the root folder of the OneDrive account and include a folder property that contains the number of files and folders at the root of the OneDrive account. To view the contents of the folder, use the children endpoint, and you can also access a specific folder if you want. Developers can use one of the many Microsoft Graph SDKs to access a user's OneDrive account. To get the currently signed-in user's root OneDrive folder with the Microsoft Graph SDK, you're going to use the following code that you see here on the slide. After first obtaining an authenticated Graph Service Client, I'm just going to call graphserviceclient.me.drive.root, and then I can use the Fluent API to get additional things and do additional things with the data that's coming back. This is going to give me back a collection of results that I can then enumerate through and display each of the different items. Microsoft Graph also enables the signed-in user to access another user's OneDrive, provided that they have been granted access to it, using the /user/userid/drive endpoint. Microsoft Graph also allows access to the users to OneDrive accounts from more than just users. For instance, you can even access a group's OneDrive account using the groups/groupid/drive endpoint. And SharePoint Site's default document library using the /sites/siteid/drive endpoint as well. Now, in order to perform OneDrive operations, you're going to need one of the following permissions. The specific permission required is going to depend on the operation that you want to perform. For example, if you are creating, editing, or deleting drives or drive items, one of the write permissions is going to be required. Some of these permissions can be granted by a user as a delegated permission, while others must be granted to the app by an administrator. Delegated permissions that are granted by users include things like file.read, files.read.all, files.readwrite, and files.readwrite.all. But application permissions, which must be granted by administrators, include files.read.all and files.readwrite.all. Now the drive item resource has a property called content, and that can be used to get access to the files itself, or the contents of the actual file. Only the drive items with the file property can be downloaded. Now the content property returns the primary stream of the file. For example, to download a specific file using the Microsoft Graph.net SDK, you're going to use the code that you see here on the slide. So after, again, getting in reference to an authenticated graph service client, I'm simply going to go find a file. So I'm getting a file stream, and then I'm going to jump all the way down to and download the file by saving it as a memory stream. Now here in the code, you see that I'm referencing a result object where I'm saying go to the content property of the file, and then I'm calling request get async and result. And that's the content property that I referred to above. Now in this first demo, what we're going to do is we're going to look at a .NET Core console app that's going to access and download files from a user's OneDrive account using Microsoft Graph. Now, before we do that though, we need to go create an Azure AD application using the Azure AD Admin Center that our application can use. So I'm going to jump over to the Azure AD Admin Center, and we're going to go to Azure Active Directory, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new app. So I'm going to come over here to App Registrations and then select New Registration. So I'll just call this my MS Graph Console Test. And this is going to be just a single tenant app. So right off the bat, it's going to go ahead and create my new app. Now, these things here, the client ID and the tenant ID, these are things that I'm going to need in my app. So I'm going to go ahead and copy these. I'm going to go back over to my console app, and I have this settings file where I can paste these values in. So I'm going to go ahead and do that before we go any further, as these are things that my app is going to need. And we'll see how we use those in just a few minutes. Now, the next thing I'm going to need to do is if I come back over here to my app, and I'm going to select the redirect URIs, there is a section here about suggested redirect URIs for public clients. Now we're using a console app, which would fall under the desktop category, which means he's got a well-known return URI that we're going to use. So because we're using the Microsoft Authentication Library, I'm going to go ahead and select this one to ensure this will work. And then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here on the default client type. Whenever I use a public client, I have to make sure I turn that on. This is something we turn on automatically. Now, we're going to use the resource owner password credential. We're going to use that flow for obtaining our access token. And what that's going to do is our console app is going to ask the user for their username and password, and then the console app is going to use that information to go log in on their behalf. In a production app, that may not be what you want to do. I would strongly recommend you take a look at the device code flow as another option for supporting authentication with your console app. We're not going to focus too much on the authentication in this module. We're going to focus mostly on using Graph and OneDrive and working with files primarily. Now, after we've created our app, we also need to give it some permissions. So I'm going to go to the API permissions, and I'm going to add a permission. I'm going to select Microsoft Graph, and we're going to create a delegated permission. And this delegated permission we're looking for is files.read. So go ahead and add files.read and say add the permission. Now, once I've gone through and added this permission, because we're not doing an interactive login, we're asking the user for their username and password. So one of the things that I'm going to want to do here to make my life just a little bit easier is I'm going to go ahead and grant the permission. And the reason for this is because we don't have an interactive login. We're asking the user for their username and password, and we're going to log in on their behalf. And so they don't have a way to grant this files.read permission to our app. So I'm going to do that by just going to this admin consent for Contoso, and I'm going to log in as my current user, and I'm going to consent on Megan's behalf. Now I'm logged in as Megan, so it's not a big deal in this case, but this is just something I wanted to do. So it's going ahead and it's adding the admin consent right now. And so we'll just give it a second and make sure that this finishes. Okay, so we can see now that it's finished. So let's go back to our app and let's take a look at this. So let's see what our code is doing. So inside of program.cs, what we're doing here is we are first going to load the settings for our app. So this function is just going to be loading those app settings that contains the tenant ID and the app ID from Azure AD. The next thing that it's going to do is we're going to prompt the user for their username and their password. After we do that, we're then going to go obtain an authenticated Microsoft Graph client. Now, the way we do this, let's go jump down here to the definition for this. The way we're doing this is we're creating an authorization provider. And you see that's being done up here. That contains the configuration that we defined, and that's inside of it has our app ID and our tenant ID. We have the username and the user's password as well. So what I'm doing is I'm going to go create a new authority that uses the tenant ID and points to the V2 Azure AD endpoint. I'm then also going to add in the 2 scopes that we need, create those in an array for a list of all the permissions we want. And then I'm going to using the Microsoft Authentication Library, I'm going to use this thing called the Public Client App Builder, our application builder, to create a public client with this client ID using this authority and then build it. This public client application is what's used for applications that are distributed to your users, such as a console app or a mobile app, because they don't have a password or certificate associated with them, because we can't trust them. Once we distribute the code to our end user, they could really do anything they want with it. And so that's why we want to make sure that we have a little bit more control over this. I'm then going to create an instance of the Microsoft Authentication Provider, passing in the client application that we created, the array of permissions, and the username and password. This MSAL Authentication Provider is a little helper bit of code that we've written here. If you take a look at this, and what this is doing is a singleton. It's creating. Let's see where it's done here. Are getting an instance of it right here. Is we're creating an instance of it. So if it doesn't already exist, we're creating an instance of it, passing in these values, and we're just saving them as properties on our application. And then if I scroll down a little bit farther, after we got our instance of it, so let's go back to our code right here. So once we have our instance of it, you'll see how this is being used as an authentication provider. So that's what's being passed back as our authentication provider. That's what's being returned back to the caller. I'm creating a new instance of the Graph Service Client. Now, that provider that I'm passing in, what that's doing is that whenever, you'll see here that there's a couple well-known methods on it. Whenever this method called authenticate async request is called, or whenever get token async is called, what this is going to do is it's going to know how to go get access to the currently logged in user and then try to obtain an access token on behalf of that user for these permissions using that account and handing that access token back. So this authentication provider is handed over to the Graph Service Client, which knows how to handle all the authentication now with MSAL. All right, so now we're in a point where we have a reference. Let's go back up here to our application. So where we have a reference to the Graph Service Client, and then I'm going to get a reference to all the files in the root folder for the current user. So I'm going to do that by going to graphclient.me.drive.root.children and then issue that request, and then call get async with the results. And it's going to write out all of the files. And one of the things that we can do is we can see what the underlying REST request is if I uncomment this right here. So let's run the application and let's see what happens. So we're going to do a .NET build and a .NET run. So after building the application, it asks me for my username. So I'll go ahead and paste that in. It's then going to ask me for my password. So I will paste that in as well. And it should go list out everything that we have in our current root of our OneDrive. So you see here I went to me/drive/root/children, and it's going to find all the files. So for example, it's going to look for a file. How about the broken pipe file right here? And if I go back to the browser, we can see that we do have a file here called broken pipe. Now another thing we can do is we can get a reference to a specific file. So let's go ahead and let's hide all of this, and I'll come back down and we will just look for a specific file here. So this specific file, let's go through and let's hide that request too. This is the ID of a very specific file. So let's update that to point to our, how about this one, the CR227. So let's just paste that in, and we'll see how we're getting a reference to a specific file when that's being written out. So let's run that same application again. And we have to log in again. So I paste my username in, and I'll grab my password from off the screen. And here we'll get reference to a specific file. So here you can see we got that specific file, and the way I'm getting it is by using the path for the qualified me/drive/items/ and then the ID. The last request that I wanted to show you is how to download a specific file. So again, we're going to grab this file, we'll paste in that ID, and we will uncomment these lines here, and we will also uncomment all of these lines. So what's happening now is we're going to create a stream, and we're going to figure out the path of where we want to save the file. I'm going to save it right to the same directory where my application is created. It's going to be called drive item underscore with the file ID, and I don't know what kind of file it is, so I'm just going to say file. I could do that. I could grab the name of it as well, but we're just going to save a little bit of time here in this demo code. And then I'll have the drive item listed out. I'll go ahead and grab the specific item that I'm looking for, and then I'm just using the stream to say copy everything to that stream and save the file. So again, let's run this. And again, it's going to prompt us to log in. Grab the password. And here you can see that once it is saved the file, you see it's listing the file out that it actually saved. And here's the file that we just downloaded right here using the same ID. So in this demo, you saw how to get a list of all the files for the current user, how to get a file, a specific file using the file's ID, and then finally you also saw how to download a file. Again, if you want to see this code in action, you want to build this yourself, there is a lab exercise associated with the module that this screencast is associated with that walks you through all of the steps, including creating the Azure AD app registration, using the Azure AD Admin Center, and writing all of the code as a .NET Core console app and working with the Microsoft Graph .NET SDK to download the file. In this section, you'll learn how to upload files to OneDrive using Microsoft Graph, including both small and large files. Now, Microsoft Graph supports uploading files up to 4 megabytes in size using a simple HTTP PUT request. To upload the file, you simply are going to submit an HTTP PUT to the collection where the new file should be created. The end of the endpoint must include the name of the file to create and the end with the content endpoint as well. So the request must include the HTTP request header content type with a value that matches the type of the file that's being uploaded. In this case here, it's just a simple text file. The contents of the file should be included in the body of the request. Now, for example, to upload a text file to the currently signed in user's root OneDrive account, I'm going to use the following HTTP request. So notice here I'm pointing to the me/drive/root endpoint and then specifying the file. And then after I specify the file name, I'm then putting /content. Notice the content type is text/plain, and then there's an empty line or a blank new line, and then I've got the contents of the file that I'm uploading. To update the file or to replace an existing file, simply do a put to the location of the existing file using the file's ID. And so notice here I'm going to /drive/items and putting in the item ID with the /content on the endpoint. You can also use the Microsoft Graph.NET SDK to perform the same action. Assuming a file named my new small file text is present in the current folder, I'm going to use on my local machine where the app is going to run. I'm going to use the following code to upload the file to the currently signed in user's root OneDrive account. So I'm getting a reference to the file name and the entire path to that local file. I'm getting a file stream to that file. And then after getting an authenticated graph client, I'm going to go to the me.drive.root endpoint. I'm going to point to an item using a specific path, and then go to that file's content, create a request, and then call the put async, saying I'm going to be uploading a drive item, and then passing in the file stream that I want to upload. Now, what about uploading larger files that are 4 megs, greater than 4 megs? So Microsoft Graph also supports uploading files larger than 4 megs up to the maximum file size that's supported by OneDrive. The support for large files also enables developers to resume a transfer in scenarios where the upload was either interrupted or paused. Uploading a file involves creating a upload session followed by uploading bytes within that session. And as the upload session uploads the file, it reports back on the progress, allowing developers to provide feedback to the user that is uploading the file. So to upload a large file, I'm going to start by creating a new upload session. So you see here, we're going to me/drive/root and then /create an upload session. This is going to return the upload session that contains the URL to upload the file and when the temporary upload location is going to expire. So here it's saying that the file is going to be called largefile.zip. Now, as long as the expiration date has not passed, you can resume the upload session when it is interrupted or it's been paused. So you can see here I'm uploading the file, large_file_zip. That's the session I'm going to create where I want it to go. And then I'm getting a response at the bottom that tells me the location of where I should be uploading it. And then second is going to include the expiration date and time. Now, once you've uploaded the session, or once you've created the upload session, you can then upload bytes to the temporary file in OneDrive. Now, in the example you see here, I'm uploading the first 25 bytes in a 128-bit file. And you can see that when you look at the first code reference there, that you see the content length that I'm uploading is 26, and the byte range is 0 to 25 out of 128. And then I'm going to stream the first 25 bytes of the file. The content range is then going to specify which chunk that I'm uploading. So that's the thing we just went through, and the total size of the file. The total size of the file should not change between the upload sessions. If the total size of the file changes between upload sessions, the upload session will fail. The previous request will yield the following response that you see at the bottom of the slide here. That will again state the expiration time and the next expected range for the file. So it's expecting 26 bytes 26 through something. When the last range of a file is received by the upload session, it'll return an HTTP 201 created or an HTTP 200 OK with response, and it will include the drive item that represents the currently created file. Now, upload sessions can be resumed in scenarios where the session was interrupted or paused, and to resume an upload session, you first determine the missing range by submitting an HTTP request, a GET request to the upload session, and that's going to return the same type of response that was returned when a range is uploaded. Use the response to determine the next part of the file that you should upload. Now, to cancel an upload session, simply submit an HTTP delete request to the upload session endpoint as follows, as you see there at the bottom of the slide. The following code is going to upload a large file to the currently signed in user's OneDrive root folder using the Microsoft Graph.net SDK. So here at the top, I'm getting a reference to the file path, fully qualified path for a file. And then once I have that path, I'm then going to go upload the file. And I'm going to do that by saying graphclient.me.drive.root. I'm going to create the item, and then I'm going to create a new upload session, and then say request.postasync.result. Now here's more of the code that you see here. What I'm doing is I'm creating the upload task. So that was before. Now what you see here is I'm figuring out what the maximum size of the file is that I'm going to upload. So I'm creating a large file upload task by passing in the session, passing in the file stream, and the maximum chunk size. I'm then going to create an upload progress reporter. This is one of the cool things that Microsoft Graph.net SDK provides us. When I create this progress reporter, what this is a function that's going to write out something to the console every time we get a response back for a new chunk that we've uploaded. And then finally, I'm going to upload the file by saying large upload task.uploadAsync, passing in my progress reporter, and then calling the .result. And what that will do is it'll go ahead and start uploading the file, and once the upload has succeeded, it will notify me saying the file has been uploaded. Now, in order to upload files to OneDrive, you're going to need one of the following permissions. The specific permission required depends on the operation that you want to perform. So the first three are delegated permissions: files.readwrite, files.readwrite.all, and sites.readwrite.all. That last one is applicable to SharePoint sites. And then you can also have application permissions that a user can't grant, or a regular user can't grant, but an administrator will have to grant. In this exercise, you're going to learn how to upload a file to OneDrive using the Microsoft Graph. Specifically, we're going to see how to upload both small files, those smaller than 4 megs, and large files. So we have, in our code that you see here, we have in our project, I have a small file.txt, which is just a file I just found on my machine, which is looks up here as just a Microsoft SQL statement. And then I have this large file, it's a zip file from a theme, and it's over 100 megs. It's over 100 megs. So this one's just a few K, this one's over 100 megs. So let's take a look at the code here. Well, before we jump into the code, we need to go make a change to our app registration in Azure AD. And the reason why we need to do this is because we need to add a new permission to our app. And specifically, we need to give our app a delegated permission of files.readWrite. So we'll do files.readWrite. We'll grant this permission. And then after granting it, we need to go through or adding the permission, we then need to have our user grant it. And again, just like the last demo, I'm going to use admin consent to make this a little bit easier for our login experience in the demo. Not something I would potentially recommend if it was a production app, but it'll work just fine for our use. So let's go look at the code for this. And what code changes did we make? Well, one of the main code changes that I made that's important is I had to go add in an additional permission in the array of scopes when our application runs. So it's going to have to also ask for an access token for files.readWrite. Now, the next thing I did is if you come over here and look at our code, we made a little bit of a change to our code right in this area. So what I'm doing is I'm getting a reference to our small file, and that's just the local file on our local project. And then I'm opening up a stream to that file, and then I'm going to go upload that file by saying client.me.drive.root. I'm going to tell it where I want to create the file or what the name is I want to create. I'm going to tell it go to the content endpoint for the file, submit a request, that part of the request, create a request, and then submit it as an HTTP put and pass in the file stream, and that will go upload our file. So let's see this in action. So now we're going to run a .NET build and a .NET run, and that's going to download all the dependencies from my project from NuGet. It's going to then run the project, prompt me to log in, just as you saw in our last example. I'm having to go log in and pass in my username and then my password. And we can see it's uploading this small file here, and it tells us where the file was created, which we should see in our OneDrive. There it is. So we can see this small file was created just a few seconds ago, which is correct. That's what we just uploaded. And you can see it's a very small file. Now, the other thing I want to do is I want to upload a large file. So what I'm going to do is let's hide all of this for a second, and let's comment all of this code out, and let's uncomment. Let's see, uncomment the reference to the large file, and then we're going to upload it as a stream. So I need to then uncomment all of this as well. And what this is going to do is create a new stream by opening up our large file. But the difference here from the last sample is we're creating an upload session, and I'm calling post async. Now notice what we're doing here. I'm creating an upload task. And so this upload task that I'm creating right here, I'm going to create that and specify here's the session that we're creating, which is what we get back, the stream, which is the file that we're going to be uploading, and then the chunks that we're going to be uploading. I then create a progress object, and the progress object is what I'm going to be able to use when I call the upload task, upload async, and every time I get a response back from Microsoft Graph as it progresses through uploading the file, it will then turn around and write out the status of the file that is being uploaded. So let's see this in action. So I'm going to come over here and let's say .NET build and run, just like we did last time. I will log in and pass in my user account, username and password, and it will start uploading the file. Now this file is about 100 to 150 meg, something like that. You can see the progress is actually running. So every time it's reporting back a chunk that's uploading, it's going to run that progress. So you can see it's uploading everything. It's almost finished there, about 500 out of the 564. Still going. Oh, actually, no, it wasn't. I was off by a digit. So it's going to take a second for this to run. And what we'll do is, through the magic of video editing, I'm going to speed this up so that you don't have to watch this. Here we can see that the file has now been completely uploaded. Let's go double check that. We'll go back over to our browser, and here again we can see the large file has now been uploaded. It is 53 megs in size, and you can see that it was just uploaded just a few seconds ago. So in this demo, you saw how we uploaded files using the Microsoft Graph SDK. We did it both using the uploading a small file and a large file. Microsoft Graph enables more features than just reading and writing files. And in this unit, you're going to learn how to generate a list of files that are trending around a user and how to get all the files owned by a specific user. Insights are relationships calculated using advanced analytics and machine learning techniques. Using Microsoft Graph, you can identify OneDrive documents that are trending around specific users. Now, insights are relationships, again, as I said, that are calculated using advanced analytics and machine learning techniques. And using Microsoft OneDrive, we can identify OneDrive documents that are trending around users. Insights are returned by the following APIs. There's a trending API, and what that does is return documents from OneDrive and from SharePoint sites trending around a user. The used endpoint returns documents viewed and modified by a user and includes documents that the user used in OneDrive for Business, SharePoint, and opened as email attachments, as well as a link to an attachment from sources like Box, Dropbox, and OneDrive. The shared endpoint returns documents shared with a user, and documents can be shared as email attachments or as OneDrive for business links sent in emails. Each insight is returned with a resource visualization and a resource reference complex value type. The resource visualization contains properties such as the title and the preview image that can be used in the UI. So this is a request that's going to return a collection of documents, each with an assigned weight that can be used to rank their relevance. So you can see here we're getting an ID value back and a weight value, and the ID is the ID of the specific insight, not of the actual object itself, but the insight reference. The weight is how things are weighted. You can use that to sort things, either higher weight, which would be preferred in most scenarios, or you can sort them in reverse order. And then we have the resource visualization and the resource reference objects. Again, the resource reference objects, those would be used in a nice web UI or a nice UI experience to give some preview of the data that's being shown. So you have the web URL value and the type, and those can be things like thumbnails and such. And then you also have, or those, how you're going to go find the actual resource. The visualization is what can be used in the preview rendering. So you have like the title of whatever the document is, the type of the document, the media type of the document. So is it an image? Is it a PowerPoint slide presentation? Is it a Word doc? And then there's a preview image that you can use. That'll be a URL to that preview image. And then finally, there's preview text as well, if that's applicable. You can also obtain the trending files around the currently signed in user with the Microsoft Graph.net SDK. And this code shows you how to do that. As you see here, the only thing you're really doing here is you're going to the me endpoint.insights.trending. And then walking through each one of these different results that comes back, I'm simply going to write out some information about the resource visualization, the weight, and the resource reference as well. Now, calculated insights that include a list of documents the user has modified. This insight returns the most relevant documents that a user has viewed or accessed. The documents returned include those found in OneDrive for Business and a SharePoint site. This is the used calculated insight. To get a list of the documents that are recently modified or accessed by the current user, you're going to submit the following request. So you're going to submit a request to /me/insights/used. This request is going to return a similar response to what we saw with the trending endpoint, except that each item returned doesn't include a weight. And in the collection, it's going to include a last used object with two properties: when it was last used or accessed, and when it was also last modified. You can do the same thing with the .NET SDK as well. Here, instead of going to the .insights.trending, I'm going to the .insights.used endpoint. And again, I can just write the results out to the console as you see here. Now, in order to access insights on files in OneDrive, you're going to need one of the following permissions. The specific permission required depends on the operation that you want to perform. So you have delegated permissions, or really just one, which is sites.read.all, and application permissions, which again can also be sites.read.all. In this last demo, we're going to see how Microsoft Graph enables more features than just reading and writing files. And in this exercise, you're going to learn how you can get a list of files that are trending around a user and how to get the recently modified and accessed files by the current user. Now, the first thing we need to do is we need to go give our app some new permissions. So I'm going to jump back over to my Azure AD Admin Center and add a new delegated permission. And this is going to be pointing to the sites.read.all. We will add that permission. And just like I did a couple moments ago in the last demo, we're going to go ahead and grant admin consent for it, or use admin consent to grant this permission. All right, now that the permission has been granted, let's go back to our console app and let's take a look at some of the changes that we made. So again, like I showed you last time, one thing we have to do is we have to add the scope, the permission that our app is going to need. So I'm doing that by adding in an additional scope. Now, the next thing we're going to do here is let's take a look at these requests that we're going to make. So let's look at the first request first, because it makes sense to do it in that order. Here we're going to get a list of all the files that are trending around the current user. And so in this case here, I'm going to the insights.training endpoint to get a reference to all the files that are trending around the current user. And I'll write out the visualization and some details about the resource. So in order to run this, we have to open up the console again and do a .NET build and a .NET run. So I'll paste in my username for my test user and their password, and let's see what we get back. All right, so we get a little bit of information back. We can see that there's an Excel file called Marketing Initiatives, and you can see we can tell what type of a file it is. So this is an Excel doc, this is a Word doc. We're also getting the weight of this file. So let's see if we have, there's the ID. Oh, we're actually getting the second one here. Let's do that one more time. We commented out request 2, but I forgot to save the file, so we're getting request 1. So actually, let's just do this in reverse order here. So this is what we were doing. This is what we just ran a second ago. We just didn't save it. So this first endpoint that we're hitting is the used endpoint. And this is telling us when the file was last accessed and last modified. And because we just uploaded those two files a minute ago, or because we have these other files here, you can see that it's giving us the files that were most recently accessed around the current user. The Insights API is not immediate. There's a little bit of a delay. And so even though we just uploaded some files a moment or two ago in the demo, they're not showing up just yet. All right. So that's the use resource. We can also do the same thing or do a similar thing by looking at files that are trending around a particular user. So let's uncomment those. This time we will save it. And when I rerun our project and log in, this time we will see files that are our user that are trending around the current user. All right. So here we get a little bit different. So you can see we're getting a weight back for this annual report, the ID of the file, or the ID of the insights object, and the resource where that file is. We can scroll up a little bit and let's see what other files it's finding for us. So we can see that this has got the heaviest weight here for all the files that were returned. So it thinks that this one is the best match for our files that are trending around the current user. And so here I showed you how we can use the Microsoft Graph .NET SDK to get some insights around the specific files. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this module or watch this screencast on this module. This screencast is associated with a Microsoft Learning module that contains hands-on lab and demos of all of the demos that you saw in this screencast. If you want to take the time to do the demos on your own, it'll walk you through each one of them, as well as references to pre-built samples showing you exactly what we did in these modules. So with that, thank you very much. I hope you learned something about working with files in Microsoft Graph.